Okay, so episode 6 of WandaVision. I thought this was a deceptively tame episode compared to the previous 5. What I mean by that is I don't think that it didn't appear really like much was happening in this episode. However, I thought there were 3 significant things that happened in this episode that are worth us considering in our Watch Companion series here. The first one has to do with the twins, right? And their continuing growth and power in the Westview world. The second point has to do with Pietro's part in all of this and what he exposes during this episode. And finally, I want to talk about our old friend Vision still and his attempts to cross over to the other side of the barrier here. Now, this episode really brought forward an important question for me about Vision's potential future in the MCU. Now, I am going to issue a soft spoiler warning here for this episode. I'm trying to keep this Watch Companion fairly spoiler free, but I'm going to do my best here to still keep to that. However, I do have a feeling that I might go into it a little bit. So if you still want to see the episode and keep it essentially, unspoiled for yourself, then go watch it and come back to this watch episode here so we can discuss these 3 important points. Now, I'm not going to say a whole lot about the twins in this episode. I don't think anyone was really all that surprised with what they saw here, with, the whole idea that they're much more like Wanda and Pietro than we might have initially thought when they were brought into the world of Westview. However, I do maintain what I said in the previous WandaVision Watch Companion episode, which is that I still find them a bit unnerving, or something about them is unnerving to me. I just have this sneaking suspicion like they're going to grow in power and surpass Wanda. And that's going to make closing up this entire Westview, world or problem really difficult. Plus, I think they're due for another growth spurt, don't you? Which would place them, I think, if I'm not mistaken, pretty close in age to the radicalization age of Wanda and Pietro. So they have it within them to be radicalized, and even in the case of Billy, right? I think it's Billy, the one who's closer to Wanda than Pietro. He certainly has it within him, that nervousness, that anxiety that matches Wanda's own nervousness and anxiety as well. And in this world, nervousness and anxiety seems to create power, right? We learned in this episode too from the discussion between Pietro and Wanda that there's an aspect still of this created world that Wanda is not 100% in charge of. And that takes me, of course, to Pietro's part in all of this. I found Pietro in this episode to be less nuanced than I thought he was going to be. He kept letting the jokes fly, which was totally fine. It's in keeping with the whole 90s extreme kind of attitude, But it seems pretty apparent to me that his role here is essentially to be a narrative disruptor of some kind. He was conveniently holding Wanda's attention throughout the whole ordeal with Vision, right? And he's also, of course, more than willing to help Vision have his alone time to go, basically just check out the entire world of Westview on his own without Wanda being necessarily, on top of him trying to figure out what's going on herself. So he's essentially a walking narrative breach, causing Wanda to lose enough focus that Vision can go do his own thing. He's also able to get Wanda to confide in him and actually let her guard down enough that we start to see again just how much Wanda is actually not in control of everything, right? Because she doesn't really know what's going on completely or how it came to that, how all of that Westview world came to be. We know that she mentions again that she felt a very deep sorrow and emptiness. And not to return to the idea, but again, that makes me nervous about the one twin, Billy. Now, in terms of Vision, you know how much I love, watching Vision in this series. And this episode got me excited because it left me with a really important question. Can Vision survive outside of the Westview barrier? Now, don't rush to answer that. Hear me out for a second. Our initial answer to this question going into this episode was definitely leaning more toward no, right? I mean, I think many of us thought if he tried to leave the barrier, he was likely going to return to that sort of grayed out version of himself, that corpsey version of Vision. Corpsey version of Vision. Hey, that wasn't that bad. However, even though he still might end up not necessarily being able to survive outside of the barrier, I think it's an important distinction to make here. When he was outside, he didn't change color, really. And it wasn't as if he was just it wasn't as if he was immediately just kind of dying. The real problem was actually coming from the barrier itself. It was essentially the barrier that was kind of pulling him apart. Now, that's not the same thing as Vision returning back to a state of being dead. So, I do think it's fair for us to consider if Vision is able to break free from the barrier, can he survive out in the world? I think the answer is yes, which means we could get more Vision in the future MCU films, and I'm all about that. Now, just some bonus content here for thought. I want to talk just really briefly about the Yo Magic commercial. This is the first commercial that really made me think a little bit here. And I thought, here's the reason why I thought it was interesting. The kid in the commercial, right, who's trying to get the lid off of the Yo Magic yogurt, you would think that it would have been the case that if he opens up the lid and breaks the seal, that he would die, right? Because the idea of the barrier as a seal of magic, right? If you break the seal, you would die. Instead, the commercial seemed to indicate if you don't break the seal, you're dead. Meaning that it made me think, is there a time limit here now where if they aren't able to break the magic seal, the people inside Westview are going to cease to exist? That's interesting to me, right? Because the timeline, you saw the young boy in the commercial decay via time, right? It was a time-lapse claymation decay. Time, of course, is moving forward in Westview, right? They keep changing the decades and whatnot, which means, is it just becoming one of those things where time is going to just decay them all out? That was interesting to me. And maybe that's why every so often Wanda sees these grayed out corpses. I don't know. Let me know in the comments, what do you think?